Welcome back to Punk Rock Theologian. Today we're going to be looking at the kind of Christians that make a difference in the world, because it might not be who you're expecting. I'm going to start with the original Christians who made like the biggest difference ever. In the book of Acts, when the church basically turned the world upside down and introduced Christianity to the world. We're going to see what we can learn from those Christians. To set the scene, the first thing you need to realize is that more than 12 guys followed Jesus around. We usually just imagine Jesus and his 12 disciples, but the Bible indicates there was a much larger crowd. I'm a music lover, so let's imagine a band on tour. There might be 5 guys in the actual band, but when you factor in roadies and sound techs and drivers, it's a much bigger number. On top of that, let's go ahead and include a group of hardcore fans that follow this band around the country, which I still don't understand how people pull that off. Like, do you not have a job? And if you don't have a job, how are you affording all the concert tickets? And whatever, that's not the point. The idea is that this 5-piece band actually represents a much larger crowd in every town they hit. So back to the disciples, that core group of 12 is undeniably important, so much so that they couldn't even leave it at 11 after Judas committed suicide. Acts 1 tells us they felt obligated to replace him. Verse 15 says there was a group of about 120 believers there when Peter got that ball rolling. We know there were women in the crowd because verse 14 just named a few of them, but that culture usually didn't count them when numbering people, so odds are that 120 didn't even include women, so there may be more than that. Whatever the actual number is, they've got quite a few options for a potential replacement for Judas. So in verse 21, Peter throws out some qualifications. It has to be someone who is with them the entire time, from Jesus' baptism all the way through the resurrection. Notice that there is no statement of faith in this. Simply by being in the room, they're identifying themselves as Team Jesus, but that's all they require. Were these guys baptized? How much scripture did they know? Could they explain substitutionary atonement? Were they good public speakers? None of that is even important enough to mention. They nominate 2 men who fit their criteria, but the text does not imply they're the only 2 who qualified. These are just the top 2, or maybe the final 2, out of however many potential candidates. As a quick side note, it's always been kind of funny to me that they use their own criteria to whittle it down to 2 people before asking God who he wants. So when they finally pray, it's like, hey God, out of all the people on the entire planet, we've got 2 people for you to pick from. Which one of these 2 is your choice? Personally, I think God's choice was this guy named Saul, who would later be known as Paul, and was definitely not on their list. But that's another topic for another day. The thing that sticks out to me right now is that they had plenty of options to choose from. Not only were there at least 120 people in the room, but evidently there were quite a few who had, in Peter's own words, been with them the entire time they traveled with Jesus. That means that in all those stories where it's Jesus and his disciples, we need to picture a bigger group. When they eat at someone's house, it's a big event. When they get in a boat and cross the lake, this is not some little rowboat. No matter how big the crowd might have been, those 12 guys were undoubtedly the in crowd. And honestly, we barely even remember all 12. Like seriously, how many disciples can you actually name without having to look it up? But the 12 were a core group that were included in an awful lot. Like, I don't get the impression there were 120 or more disciples at the Last Supper when Jesus is washing their feet. But there clearly were a lot more people who, according to Peter's criteria, were with them for all 3 years while they traveled around with Jesus. So why does the size of Jesus' entourage matter? Well, for starters, it's an excellent example of punk rock theology. The vast majority of us have this incredibly consistent impression that there's the 12 disciples with Jesus. But the Bible doesn't tell us that. This is an idea that was handed to us from someone else talking about the Bible, not from the Bible itself. You gotta watch out for stuff like that. It's not like you're gonna go to hell for imagining a smaller crowd than it really was. We always want to follow what God actually said, not just what some commentator or preacher says about what God said. This is just an example of that distinction, and it's something to watch out for. More importantly for you and me, it means that you don't have to be one of those inner circle 12 to really matter to the story. As you continue in the book of Acts, it's the crowd that disperses across the Roman Empire and beyond, taking the life-changing message of Jesus to the world and fulfilling the Great Commission. Those 12 apostles stay in and around Jerusalem for years before they go anywhere. And when they do go somewhere, it's usually to check in on a revival that's already happening and to help teach and guide these new believers who are already there. In our own context, that means you don't have to be on the church staff to make a difference. Jesus had people that supported his ministry financially. There were some that prepared meals. We often read of Jesus in people's houses in various towns. So there were evidently people welcoming Jesus and probably his entourage, however big that happened to be that day, to stay with them for at least one night. Most importantly, the news of him spread everywhere, so there were a lot of people sharing his message. Maybe they relayed his teaching, maybe they told about a miracle they experienced themselves or at least witnessed, or maybe they just couldn't stop talking about what this Jesus guy was like because they actually spent time with him and knew him. You and I are just as eligible for any of those roles as they were. We're never going to be one of the 12 apostles. That list is set, but we can spend time with Jesus and talk about about him. We can offer him our time and resources. We can invite other people to get to know him too. If you've encountered Jesus and he's made any kind of difference in your life at all, then you already have all the qualifications you need to share that story with someone else. Don't worry about whatever credentials you don't have. You don't have to be one of the beautiful people in the in crowd to matter. Changed lives change lives. Your story matters, and you are uniquely qualified to tell it.